Ladies and gentlemen, we've got quite the discussion to talk about today because everyone seems to have a different take when it comes to Wuthering Waves 2.5. Is it a filler patch? Is it not a filler patch? What is the definition of a filler patch? It has story, but it's still filler. And what I wanted to do today was actually take a look at this video by Nowl, which I'm 99% sure is actually addressing the issue, give some of our definitions and our take to the discussion, and explain why there's this difference in opinion on both sides, or maybe even 3 sides or 4, depending on what your definition is. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right on into this one.
Wuthering Waves 2.5 just revealed another big surprise, and honestly, I gotta say it's freaking insane. They really pulled out some heavy hitters this time. From the content they showcased to the overall vibes, this version feels like a serious step forward.
I think it's a serious step forward story-wise and quality of life-wise. I think that without a doubt, this is one of the most highly teased or like built up stories in the history of Wuthering Waves. It's been cooking since essentially version 2.0. All of the stuff that's gonna, be, that big sort of like final showdown with the Order. That's 6 to 7 months in the making. And they've managed to come out with some of the best quality of life updates to like echo farming, merging all like sorting all of that we've seen in a very long time. Solid stuff over there from that perspective.
And I'm genuinely hyped for what's coming. Well, now I don't know if I'm the minority or the silent majority, because while I'm over here geeking out, I've also seen quite a few people online throwing shades at the patch. And hey, that just proves one thing: no matter how good something is, you really cannot please everyone. Internet rules number 1. But before we dive deeper, if you've been enjoying my videos lately, or maybe you just stumbled across this one, please consider subscribing. It really helps me making more content like this, and smash that like button if you're vibing with it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video.
Bro needs to update that. the YouTube UI does not look like that anymore, bro. I'm gonna be honest with you. That's maybe 10 years old. You gotta find a different graphic for that one, bucko.
Now, for those of us who's trying to enjoy the game without constantly doom scrolling through gacha discourse, or prefer to stay away from the community, which is the healthiest option, I guess. But by the way, let me give you some quick context on what's been going on. After version 2.5 livestream aired, the conversation quickly took a turn. Some folks were saying the livestream felt a little bit shorter compared to the previous ones, which is okay, sure, the stream was technically a few minutes shorter, but not drastically. That shouldn't have a big deal, right? Apparently not for some people. For some reason, that minor detail combined with how the information was delivered got people fired up. I saw comments calling 2.5 that version or just a filler version. Like, bro, what the frick? Did we even watch the same stream? Let's break this down.
I'm very interested in hearing what the reasoning is for people calling it a filler patch, because I think just by the most common definitions that people know, it literally is not.
Because I feel like the term filler patch or filler itself is getting thrown around like candy Halloween, but no one's reading the wrapper.
Candy at Halloween. That was, I don't know why he sounded like like he got fucking zipped through a portal there, but yeah, that's what he meant to say, I think.
Because from my understanding, at least, a filler patch, at least in gaming terms, is an update that doesn't really move the needle. No big lore drop, no significant features, just minor changes or recycled content meant to keep us busy until the next major thing hits. Basically, it's the developer saying, here, chew on this while we finish cooking the main dish. Even based on Google, a filler patch refers to a game update that primarily focuses on minor context addition or gameplay adjustment, rather than significant story progression or new areas to explore.
And I think this is truly the definition that should come to most people's minds when they think about like a filler patch or like a filler season or like a filler episode. Filler is essentially the devs taking a shortcut one way or another to, still come out with something new for their players or viewers, but not necessarily putting in the same full effort that they would for a regular patch. And that means that there's something significantly lacking, and the main areas that are lacking are things like story progression and new areas that they're adding. And by that definition, Wuthering Waves 2.5 doesn't necessarily have anything missing in regards to a new explorable area or the story. It is filled out from there. There is a new main story quest, and there's a brand new zone, as well as like new mobs and stuff like that that will be populating the zone, and new bosses. So my take is that the only reason, the only kind of like leg that somebody would have to stand on to call it a filler patch is simply the lack of events in the patch relative to other versions. That's it. It doesn't have as many events, combat events, stuff like that, compared to other versions, and that's why they're calling it a filler patch. It's got all the other characteristics of a, full-fledged patch, and the sheer lack of events is the only reason that somebody could call it filler.
These patches often include event, quests, or activities that do not substantially advance the main narrative or expand the game's world. I think the problem for some people here is that they often use the word filler without fully understanding what it actually means. I've seen quite a few comments floating around on X, on Reddit, or even on Wuthering Waves YouTube videos saying stuff like it's a bad filler patch because it lacks of content. But let's be real, that reaction might be heavily influenced by the way livestream was delivered last time. I noticed a lot of people were not exactly thrilled with how the information was presented in that 40 minutes video. The structure fell a bit off, not gonna lie, and the pacing did not help either.
I think it was the lack of set adjustments that they had. I'm pretty sure a majority of the live stream was held with this very same backdrop. Naturally that has some sort of psychological effect, right? If you're seeing the same exact backdrop for every single time across the live stream, you're naturally going to assume that like not much has changed or they haven't like moved on to the next subject. And then when the live stream starts and ends on the same backdrop, that could make people feel like, oh, we didn't like go anywhere. We didn't like do anything. When in reality, a lot of stuff actually happened.
Help either.
It's like a psychological thing, right?
The hype just didn't land on the way it's supposed to, and as a result, expectations were not met. Some players are also drawing comparison between 2.5 and version 2.4, which is fair. 2.4 was one of the game's strongest updates so far. It brought a major story progression, exciting new character reveal, a new region to explore, the whole package. So
True.
Yeah, I get why people might look at 2.4 and feel like it's a step down in terms of spectacle. Well, we might not getting a big new face like Chisa or Chuyuan in the main story quest this time, but that doesn't mean it lack of content, and calling it a bad version on top of that, I'm gonna have to respectfully disagree.
I think that he brings up a pretty good point here. A pretty significant point that I think a lot of people haven't factored in is that 2.4 was an extraordinarily large patch to a degree where it had 2.4 easily had more content than like 2 prior Wuwa patches combined and like 2 patches of like other games combined. I'm pretty sure any update aside from a version 1 is going to look small in comparison following after version 2.4. Nothing is going to end up looking super substantial or super large unless it's literally at the scale of another massive map expansion right after they just released Septimon. And the thing is that, well, in the gacha release cycle, a version like 2.4, with how big it is, and let me just give a bit of a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, just how big version 2.4 was. Yeah, you see, this is the 2.0 map over here. Pretty big, right? Basically goes from like corner to corner of my screen, not like fully all the way over there. Yeah, that's Septimon, bro. It's like the same fucking size. Yeah, it's literally like the same fucking size, right? It doesn't fit on the corner of the screen. There's also that little island over here. Yeah, Septimon is essentially the same exact size as Rinasida. And when you have a gacha release cycle like this, where, you're updating the game every 6 weeks, maybe every 7 weeks, depending on the time of the year, well, some people need time to complete all that stuff. And there can be, in this sort of game, right, too much permanent content released at once, where you don't want to bloat the game to the degree where you have like massive updates like this literally every single patch, typically after a massive one that introduces a lot, you kind of tone it down a bit on the next one. They're still adding a new area and they're still progressing the main story. And so they're honestly, for a follow-up after a big patch, 2.5 still has a lot. The biggest comparison that we can make is version 2.1, where we got this. This is what we got in version 2.1 alongside the fishing event. There was no main story in version 2.1, which was the fishing patch. And so instead of like a fishing event and a new region, we're getting a new region plus main story. And I'm pretty sure, guys, in that new area, there's probably going to be an exploration quest or two in there as well. So, yeah. I mean, just from like a feature-wise, yes, things are going to look small to version 2.4, but even comparatively, it's still quite a substantial update. And the thing is, this is right after a big patch. If 2.6 was filler as well, or 2.6 was as, you know, didn't had the same characteristics as 2.5, then I would have some issues, right? Then I'd probably be saying something. Because that would be 2 patches in a row with slightly less content, or really a decrease in content relative to the prior version. And so if 2.6 is kind of like the same vein where there's like no combat events, that sort of stuff, then I'd raise some havoc, right? Then I'd cause some issues. Then I'd say some things about the effort that the devs are putting in, because other games have done multiple filler patches in a row, low quality filler patches in a row. And I don't think that is something that Wuthering Waves has ever done yet.
Now, I do understand if people are saying 2.5 feels like a slower patch, especially for players who mainly enjoy the combat side of the game. This update does not exactly deliver a brand new combat event, but here's the catch. Adding new combat challenges does not automatically mean a patch is not a filler, and not having one doesn't automatically make it filler either.
And I don't think people have even recognized just how much variation there can be in overworld content. This all looks relatively new. And something you guys gotta factor in is that overworld content in itself can almost be like its own event, where you got all of these different challenges available, right? Even if you just look at like what's in Septimont, you still got all of these like different battles that you can do. I'm sure there'll be like some new interesting mechanics in the zone, and you know, a bunch of pretty meaningful stuff for you to spend your time on in the update.
To me, 2.5 offers more than enough to break free from that label. One of the biggest highlights we're getting in this patch is none other than Prolova. And honestly, I think this is way bigger than most people realize. She's not just another character being added to the roster. She's been deeply involved in the core story since the earlier arcs. She literally led the enemy forces in both Wanglong and Runasida, which playing a major role in shaping the conflict. And now she's becoming playable, which also makes her the first antagonist in the game to cross the line. That itself is already a huge deal. Like I've said it in some of my previous videos, it sets a precedent. It gives us a glimpse of how Kuro might handle other antagonists in the future. For example, Scar. But it does not stop there. We're also getting a brand new main story quest, Chapter 2 Act 7, where Prolova takes center stage again. Based on the trailer we saw during the livestream, it looks like we're finally going to dive into her backstory, like her connection to the rover, the secret behind Runasida, and the lingering threats that will automatically lead us to Fenrico, the new weekly boss in 2.5.
This has been a story, like I said before, that's been boiling for literally months for one character and years for another. Prolova has cooked since 1.0. Literally version 1.0, and then she greatly accelerated her role, right, and her story involvement starting from 2.0. And Fenrico is somebody that we've been priming up for greater than half of a year. And this is the update, this is the patch where that conflict is actually going to, you know, come to some form of a climax. And that is when, ladies and gentlemen, we can go ahead and talk about the actual story significance of what is occurring in the patch. These are two of the biggest driving forces of the entire conflict that we've seen across 2.0. They have had like interludes at like the end of stories. They're always brought up at the end of like the 2.0 quest, the 2.2 quest, and even like the end of the 2.4 quest. And the end result is that, guys, this is supposed to be one of the more hype moments in the Wuthering Waves story. Over a year in payoff. is coming. And to call a story moment like that filler when we've literally been there along the entire time and they've been a prominent part of every story quest, I don't really think it can possibly fit that definition, at least from the story involvement angle. This isn't like some shit in like Genshin Impact or some shit in HSR where you had to like pay attention to like one line of like an artifact description or like one offhand name mentioned at the end of a story quest for like, you know, for like a paragraph or a sentence. These are characters that have had a significant amount of screen time. They've had a significant amount of mind share across the players. And they have been like directly involved in pulling the strings in the story one way or another. And we have experienced it and seen all of it firsthand. I genuinely think the only way you call this filler, at least from the story perspective, is if you're a story skipper. If you're calling it filler for other reasons, sure. But for the story, impossible unless you're a Giga skipper.
If that is not big enough for a gacha game that thrives around combat and lore, I honestly don't know what is. I mean, we already know Fenrico has some connection to the Fraxidus, but getting to peel back more of that fake smile is already satisfying enough for me. If anything, I'd say most people would agree with me when I say the main story quest alone is already enough to take away the filler label. In fact, if we really want to talk about filler, I would argue that version 2.1 fits that term more.
Agreed. Version 2.1 is literally a filler patch.
Didn't really move the main lore forward much, and instead they introduced the new fishing mechanism. Even in 2.3, it leaned more into the filler territory since it was focused more around the anniversary celebration.
2.3 was also a filler patch.
I mean, it's still a fun patch, no doubt, but in terms of lore or major gameplay impact, not so much. Still, I totally understand why people might look at 2.5 and still feel like it's a filler, mostly because of the lack of new flashy events. But here's the thing we tend to forget. 2.5 has not been released yet. All we've seen are teasers, and let's be honest, Kuro has a habit of holding back one or two surprises that they don't fully reveal in the livestream.
True.
And if you look at the bigger picture, this patch already offers way more than what you expect from something labeled as filler. New map, a new echo set, on top of that this one only needs 3 echoes to activate the passive effect, a new boss, a brand new main story quest, a new Augusta related side quest, updates to the Dreaming Deep content and the gameplay adjustment.
And this is the whole point about Dreaming Deep, is they have made so many sweeping updates, or at least they've advertised the changes to Dreaming Deep as very substantial and enough to bring a majority of the player base back to actually play the game mode. Because one thing for certain is that they had a lot of clunkiness in how long it took to actually complete the game mode, and that led to a lot of people not actually playing it at all and completely putting it off. And so, from that perspective, right, a lot of people are talking about the lack of events or content event-wise in version 2.5, but similarly, if the changes to Dreaming Deep are significant enough to actually make it a game mode that people actively want to play, then that pretty much solves all the problems as a whole. Because believe me, I do think a good portion of the player base hasn't really touched Dreaming Deep at all, and we're waiting for updates to change it. I myself was included in that bunch, and I'm sure there will be plenty that will be excited to hear about all the actual quality of life changes, all the quality of life updates that were made. And that alone could offset that lack of combat event that people were talking about. Because Dreaming Deep is basically just one big-ass combat event.
A new ecosystem management, and more. Which make me see it just lead to a bigger and better structure of the game in the next patch. Which might as well help the developers so they can focus on the lore development instead of worrying about this later on. But let's be real, Kuro Games likes to hear about our feedback and changing stuff here and there. So maybe we will see another fix in the next patch as well, but hopefully it will get better and better from now on. So what I can conclude about this topic, about the fillers and stuff, is it a filler patch? Well, nope, at least not for me. Is it a bad patch? Well, absolutely not. Is it lack of content? Nope, absolutely not, because we got a lot of things to discover in the next version. But still, what do you think? Let us know in the comment section.
Just to reiterate my final take, this is not a filler patch by any definition anyone has ever used in the past. The only reason somebody could have to call it a filler patch is the lack of advertised combat events. That's pretty much the only reason. You have events of every other capacity, and you have a main story quest, and you have a new region. The only reason for why somebody would call it filler, that's it. It's just a lack of combat events. And in my opinion, Dreaming Deep, if executed well enough, makes up for that lack of combat events, because most people have, put it off the table for now. So it'll be like a new experience for a good part of the player base. For some reason, I think there was like a debate of like people saying that like it's filler or something. Guys, it doesn't fit the definition of filler patch, like literally the definition of it, because it has main story progression. My take is, if you want to keep calling it filler, you're using the word incorrectly, and you're fine to do that. It's just, I don't think you're using the word correctly, but words change definition all the time. The more accurate thing to say is, I don't think the patch has as much content. Or if you really want like A+ brownie points, you specifically point out where the patch is lacking content. And if you just ask yourself that simple question of, what makes this patch less satisfying than others? The only answer you could come up with is there's not as many combat events as I would have liked. And if that's, again, the only answer you're coming up with, then it's not a filler patch, it's just lacking combat events. That's it. Is there any other perspective that people could have? I don't think there is. But yeah, it's not filler, at least by the definition most people are using. That'll be that, ladies and gentlemen. Let me know what you all think. Peace.